The year of 2021 took an important lesson from 2020, and that was to delay your game as long as possible so you don't end up like Cyberpunk 2077. Sadly, some developers didn't seem to figure this out. However, with the forest canopy cleared of giant AAA treetops, the undergrowth blossomed into a lush, beautiful world of games that would have otherwise been ignored. Luckily for you, I've been living in this verdant undergrowth and have harvested for you the top 5 games I played in 2021. Number 5. Death's Door. Devolver Digital continues its successful trend of finding small and indie developers with amazing, unique games and saying, "Hey, let us tell people about this." Death's Door was one such title that spent just as much time surprising me as it did impressing me with its presentation. The unique visuals of its odd, broken world never ceased to amaze me as I explored each new biome. At first, I was afraid the game would be another stamina-based Souls-like that would quickly grind away at my will to live. But after trying it out, I discovered something more like a classic Zelda game with the same item-based progression system. When you slap a strange story about life, death, and reaping souls as a random bird as well as a soundtrack that will give you all the nicest tingles, you've got yourself one of the best games of the year. Number 4. The Ascent. So it turns out I was one of the lucky ones that didn't really have any notable issues with this game. Some encountered game-breaking bugs that sounded like a nightmare that would have easily launched this baby right off the list if they had happened to me, but they didn't, so here it is at number 4. What it did do right is bring the world of Cyberpunk with a little c back into the mainstream and let that wonderful aesthetic lift it high into the neon-lit sky. The environments are filled with characters of all shapes and sizes, and each area is brimming with designs that make you want to cut off an arm and replace it with one made of chrome. Whether it's the eerie radiance of storefront lights giving off that iconic foggy glow, or walking ass-deep in garbage that has slowly morphed itself into the architecture it was thrown on, you'll feel that cyberpunk design all the way to your soul. Couple that with a story about giant evil corporations doing that typical giant evil corporation stuff and dystopian capitalism conquering the masses, and you've got yourself a game I'm probably gonna like. All of this was wrapped neatly around a fairly generic but totally competent twin-stick shooter experience that took full advantage of cool explosions and gory kills triggered by a nice collection of wild weapons and chaotic powers. What more could a weirdo like me ask for? Number 3. Chivalry 2. Not every game has a button dedicated to screaming, but Chivalry 2 does. This is a button that you can press at any time with few limitations and serves no purpose but to let the world know that you have the intent to kill them and the means to achieve it. Chivalry 2 had its fair share of bubonic plague level problems in its early days, including totally broken matchmaking and hit recognition being hamstrung for seemingly no reason after launch. However, the developers managed to mostly resolve these issues, leaving us with a beautifully barbaric medieval mayhem simulation fit for a king. With a combat system defined by skill just as much as it is the weapons and classes that wield them, players are met with a system that is easy to pick up but filled with a nuance that allows for hundreds of hours of attempted mastery. Yet when you run out there swinging an axe like a drunken psychopath with as many hits to your teammates as your enemies, you'll feel equally accomplished. Whether you're burning down huts and sieging castle walls in the objective mode, or just painting every surface in shiny ribbons of blood and deathmatch, there's a solid amount of variety to keep players interested. You can even dive into an intense 1v1 match to see how much you can actually suck in the shortest possible amount of time. It really has everything you need to blow off some steam with over-the-top visceral action while also building a psychological complex trying to figure out how to get better at melee combat. Or you can just play an archer and be hated by everyone everywhere for the rest of your life. Number 2. Metroid Dread. Few companies other than Nintendo can get away with making a direct sequel to a game that released nearly 20 years prior as part of a pentalogy spanning 3.5 decades. Whether you've been following for that long or not doesn't really matter though, since virtually every Metroid game follows the same premise. Samus shows up, somehow loses all of the cool shit she normally has, and spends the rest of the game getting it back while killing everyone and everything on the way. Metroid Dread doesn't break with this tradition, but unlike previous entries, this one dug its grapple beam in and didn't let me go. It brings Metroid into the future by embracing its two-dimensional past and somehow managed to let me play the game without spending 2/3 of my time lost in shooting every wall in every corner of the map. It also expands on the classic boss battle design by giving you a half-dozen Terminator robots that hunt you down anytime you get near their static filtered zones. What it does best though is delivering a near-perfect rendition of the classic Metroidvania genre it created, while also being just challenging enough that the dozens of times I died didn't make me feel like a total piece of shit. Smart world design, responsive and interactive combat, and one of the few reasons I picked up my Switch in a while are all reasons this was almost the best game I played this year. Number 1. Inscryption. I've always been a fan of unique and weird games. If you show me something I've never seen before, I'm probably going to appreciate it on the surprise alone. However, when you make a game this weird and also really damn good, you might just make it to the number 1 spot on a top 5 list you've never heard of before. Inscryption takes the extremely familiar world of card battle games and uses it to lull you into a false sense of security before throwing a burlap sack on your head and hauling you off to Crazy Town. The incredibly unique experience that mixes familiar gameplay with escape room-style mechanics and a story that builds into an increasingly wild narrative are only part of what makes this so great. The card gameplay grows in complexity just enough to make it seem comparable with classics like Slay the Spire, while also changing things up the moment you might feel like you've seen it all. By the time it wraps up, it feels like you've played several games in one, and each was at the pinnacle of quality and design. Between the insanity of this story and the thoroughly compelling gameplay, it's hard to describe this as anything other than one of the most enjoyable games I've played all year. And if that wasn't enough, there's an entire elaborate ARG with clues hidden throughout the game if you're cool enough to want to Sherlock Holmes that shit. Since one game fell just shy of this top 5 and I didn't want to be a total Devolver Digital shill, I believe an honorable mention should be given for Loop Hero. This game was one of the most surprising of the year for the fact that the trailers initially made it look like it was boring enough to send a man into a coma. However, it ended up being one of the most addictive and time-dilating journeys since Civilization, and I definitely recommend checking it out. This year was an interesting year for games. I didn't get to play everything I wanted to play despite the limited releases, but it wasn't hard to come up with a top 5 from the games I did get to check out. If you'd like to see me and a whole collection of other similar game-playing dorks talk about these games and many others, check out this Independent Game Awards video. Until then, I'll be headed into 2022 ready to deliver more hot takes, warm satire, and tepid commentary for you and anyone else who might stumble onto abbreviated reviews.